Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our American Family Insurance DreamBank page, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams and are committed to helping you pursue yours. I'm Hannah, and today I have the honor of introducing our fantastic speaker, Sarah Malik. Sarah is a licensed marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor. She has taught classes for the University of Wisconsin-Madison about couples, relationships, and family stressors. Sarah has been providing therapy to individuals, couples, and families for 8 years, and last year she started her own private practice, Malik Therapy. Sarah lives in Verona with her husband of 10 years and her 2 kids, ages 5 and 2. If you have any questions throughout the event, leave a comment and Sarah will answer them at the end. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sarah Malik.
Hi, thanks, Hannah. I'm really excited to be with you guys tonight. Originally, my plan with this talk was to have it be a little bit more interactive and be able to, give you guys some time to talk about some things and for us to come back together as a group. But unfortunately, you're going to just kind of get stuck hearing me talk for a bunch of it. So I'm hoping that you can leave this with some great tools to use in your relationships, and that can be a couple of relationship, a partnership, romantic relationship, or with your roommate, with your parents, with your friends. So many different relationships that we have that communication is so important. And like Hannah mentioned, we will answer questions at the end. I'm not too great at multitasking to be able to look at those as we're going, so we will jump right in. All right. So a quote that I really wanted to start with is, a good relationship isn't something you have, it's something that you do. And this really speaks to me a lot, and why I'm really passionate about this topic is because relationships are hard. We are complex and our interactions are complex. And I think that we are wired for connection. We want to belong, we want to feel understood, and that can be really difficult to do, and communication is such a huge part of that. So I really enjoy working with couples, individuals, families, to be able to find ways to make that work a little bit better, because it's certainly not easy. This quote also, I think, is a really great reminder of us needing to be intentional in our relationships. They're not just things we can sit back and be passive and just kind of let them happen to us if we want them to be high quality. So it's important to put that effort in and make those intentional choices. And I think that there's kind of a misconception with that relationships, if they're meant to be, they should be easy. And that's certainly not the case. They take different amounts of time or different amounts of effort over time, but, definitely not easy, but they should feel worth it. So putting in that effort, that's something that we're going to talk a little bit more about today. Another thing that came to mind as I was getting ready for this is just how interesting it is, with the state of the world right now and where we're at, not having the same type of connection as we're used to. And, when thinking about communication and what I was going to talk about today, it really hit me how many people, before 8 weeks ago, would we communicate with on a daily basis. And like I said, we are wired for connection. I wave at the crossing guard. I say hi to my daughter's teacher and, hope that they have a good day. You say thank you and make small talk with the person who checks out your groceries. Those things have had to change a lot for us. And it's really interesting to see how we adapt and try to fit that connection in other ways. Communication through Facebook Live, through Zoom, not being able to give hugs and handshakes and high fives and, show communication in that way for our care for people, but having to do it in a little bit of a different way. So definitely an interesting time that we're in, and a big reminder that it does take a lot of effort. So as we're going through the talk today, what I'd like for you to do is to keep in mind this question: how do you communicate? It's definitely not a straightforward question of, good or bad, or, just have one answer, because it really changes depending on the situation and depending on who you're talking about or talking to, and just where you're at with things. So, the way that you talk to your best friend is going to be very different than the way that you talk to your boss. The way that you talk to your partner or your roommate when you guys are having fun and, hanging out or on a vacation without stress is going to be very different than the way you talk to them after they just did something really irritating and you're frustrated with them. what we do when we communicate changes. It also looks different if we have all the time in the world or if we're rushed. We do different things. So keeping in mind throughout the next half hour, how do you communicate and being mindful of that. So first thing that I want to really dive into is, what do you bring to the table in your relationships and in your communication? And I think one of the big ones is our own mood. That is a very important contributor of how our conversations are going to go. I know for me, definitely, days when the kids are listening, or when I have a great day at work, or things just seem to be really going well, I talk a lot differently to my kids, to my partner, to everybody than I do when both the kids have 17 timeouts and, crack my phone screen and the internet doesn't work, those types of things. So very important to be mindful of, what are you bringing to the table in terms of your mood. I feel like a great example of that is, kind of before we were all at home and, my husband would go to work and would come home, there would certainly be days that would be kind of fairy tale-esque of, he'd walk in the door and the kids would go running and give hugs and kisses and be so happy to see him, and I'd give him a hug and a kiss, and how was your day? Those are great days. Those look very different communication-wise to days that he walks in the door to no one greeting him, but everyone crying, or everyone yelling, or everyone yelling and crying. It looks very different depending on what you're bringing to the table. And same way is true for him if he had a great day at work or not so great day at work. The next one on here is the feelings about the conversation or topic. So if you are talking to a friend about a really great movie that you watched, or an upcoming trip that you're excited for, talking about something that you're passionate about, that's going to look very different than if you're feeling really uncomfortable and nervous, stuck in a really heavy political debate with someone who disagrees with you. There's a lot of different ways that how we feel about that topic or that conversation can play a role in what that communication looks like. The next one on there is the possible resentment that might be there from unresolved conflict. So the first time a particular argument comes up, we might handle it very differently than we do down the road, 100 arguments in of, oh man, this again, and feeling very frustrated and kind of defeated before the conversation even starts. So if you're bringing those past hurts and past resentments to the table, recognizing that that has an impact on what that communication is going to look like also. Vulnerability I have on there as well. So how open are you to having that conversation and that communication? Are you willing to be, open and be raw and say, I'm hurting, or this is really difficult for me. I'm feeling defeated. I'm feeling frustrated. Or are you defensive? Are your walls up and not very willing to have that openness? That certainly shapes the way a conversation is going to look. And then the last one on there is expectations. So that could be based on our family of origin, which is the family we grew up in. Could be based on other experiences we've had with friendships or relationships, things like that. Our expectations play such a big role in what we are looking to get out of conversations, or just what we think that they should be. So if you grew up in a family where conflict was avoided, that is going to look very different from somebody who brings to the table, we just get it all out there and hash it out, and it doesn't matter if people's feelings get hurt. There's a whole range of how people might handle conflict and what might be the norm for them. So knowing what you bring to the table, and definitely knowing the differences between what you and whoever you're talking with brings to the table, is really important, just to keep that from feeling overwhelming and frustrating. So what I think is really important is to break down what are some difficulties that a lot of us have in communication. And the first one that is so common is differences in the intention of what somebody's trying to communicate and what the other person is interpreting and what they're hearing. So communication is not just as simple as, I'm going to say something, the other person's going to hear it. If it was, it would be easy. That would be something that we wouldn't really have very many miscommunications, or, probably not as many disagreements. But that's not that simple. So if I have a message that I'm trying to get to you, I have to first think of what it is, then find the words to say it. I pass that on then to you. You have to hear it, and you have to try to make sense of it, to be able to formulate a response. So there's a lot of moving pieces to that, and very, very often somebody's intention is not how that, how that information gets interpreted. There's been lots of couples research where, they'll label them partner A and partner B, and partner A will say a message and both people will write it down on a notepad, and partner B will respond and both people will write it down, and so on and so forth, back and forth, until at the end of the conversation, when they look at their notepads, it was as if they were in two completely different conversations. So really apparent in a situation like that, wow, what I thought I was saying and the message I was trying to get across was not really what the other person heard. So you can imagine where that leads to miscommunications and feelings of frustration and just not really getting along all that well. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, of how to kind of overcome that and eliminate some of those miscommunications. The next one is assumptions and expectations. So we talked about expectations just a bit ago, but in terms of difficulties in communication, if we're assuming that something is true and it's not, we're operating under different beliefs than the other person. So it's going to get messy, and it's going to, potentially lead to conflict. Logistics is just kind of a broad term that I used here to talk about just some of the nuts and bolts and the other things that can lead to people having problems communicating. So sometimes that looks like lack of details. Maybe we're in a hurry and we're running out the door and we don't have time to say all the things that would make that communication higher quality. Or, really great example that I know I've run into when working with couples is, one partner will ask the other partner to do something and they'll say, oh, sure, yep, I will. And, half hour will pass and that task isn't done. The partner who asked for that then feels like, okay, they're being lazy, or they didn't hear me, they're ignoring me, they don't care that I'm requesting this of them, when really, additional details of, oh, sure, I'll do that after the show is over. Those additional details could clear up some miscommunications really quickly. I feel like that happens a lot now, especially since we're in such close contact with people and we have so much more opportunity to communicate. So there's, in some ways, we have a lot more interaction than we have previously. The next one is multitasking, and I know that I am guilty of this, and I would guess a lot of you are also, of somebody's talking to you and you maybe are on your phone, or you are distracted with thinking about something else. So something is keeping your attention from being fully focused on that conversation. So that can definitely be a barrier and cause problems in communication. Or maybe you're only hearing bits and pieces and the message you take away is different than what they were intending to send. So important to keep that in mind as well. As far as personal factors, some people have just more of a flat affect or tone. So maybe you're perceiving them to be angry when they're really not, or, just different traits that they have make their communication seem a different way than maybe you would assume or would expect it to be. So all of these, it boils down to they can lead to miscommunication, which is really the breeding ground for conflict. And that is something that a lot of people really struggle with. How do we manage conflict in an effective way? Or how do we keep a disagreement from turning into an argument? So what I want to work on today and try to help everyone gain some tools with is how can we minimize those miscommunications? The first step in that is being able to work on active listening. So rather than listening to respond to what your partner or your roommate or your boss or coworker is saying, listening to actually hear what the other person is saying. This can be really difficult because we like to move very fast and we like to, have conversations and get them over with and move on to the next thing. But sometimes we lose a lot of the content and the connection there, and it ends up just feeling like we're on different pages. So, sometimes also in those conversations, we feel defensive or as if we're being accused of something. I know for me, that definitely makes me listen in that conversation much differently. It's much more difficult to be present with, okay, this is how the other person is feeling. And instead my mind goes to, well, that's not true. And they do that also. And, all these things to try to, make myself feel safer and not as though I'm being attacked. So being able to use that active listening and listening to respond, I feel like that's something, I know a lot of people really struggle with, myself included. So that is a very good thing to be mindful of. Being able to ask clarifying questions can minimize communication. So rather than just assuming, okay, I think I know what they meant, being able to clarify and make sure that you understand what it is that they're saying. The next one is prefacing conversations. So I always use this example, and my husband doesn't necessarily love that I bring him into this, but I remember very vividly a time when the internet was out at work and it wasn't working, and it was so frustrating. And I came home and I said, oh, you wouldn't believe what day I had. I had all this extra time with, cancellations, and I couldn't get anything done because the internet wasn't working. It was so annoying. And, what he thought was helpful and supportive in that moment was, did you try to turn it off and back on again? Did you check the router? Did you do this? Fortunately, I kept in my mind rather than saying out loud, of course I did that. What do you think? I'm stupid that I wouldn't think to turn it off and back on? And, his intention of that statement was to be supportive, to offer technical support. What I was looking for in that moment was just, oh man, that sucks. That really sounds like a rough day. I'm sorry to hear that. Some validation, some emotional support. So if I could have a do-over of that conversation, I would maybe start it by saying, oh, it was such a rough day. Can I just vent for a minute? I think a couple of really magical things happen when you're able to do that. It feels a little uncomfortable at first because we're really not used to talking in that way. But what I really like about it is, it helps guarantee the speaker that they're going to get what they need. Maybe not guarantee, but it makes it a lot more likely because you're not relying on the other person to be a mind reader. You can just straight up ask, hey, could you play devil's advocate? Could you give me some advice? Could you just listen? And it helps them and lets them really be present with you, because instead of, with that example I just gave, instead of my husband having to fix it, he can just sit back and just hear that. He doesn't really have a job of having to, okay, what would I do if the internet was out, and try to be my technical support. That's not what I was looking for. So that can feel much more connecting when we're able to ask for what we need, which leads right into the next one. Sometimes we have a really hard time asking for what we need. First of all, we have to identify what it is, and then we have to feel comfortable and know how to find the words to be able to ask. If we don't ask and we just think our partner should know, a lot of resentment can build up because we feel like our needs go unmet, and that's really hard when that goes time after time. And then the last one there is giving feedback. So being able to say, hey, when you said fill in the blank, it really hurt my feelings. It made it seem like you were criticizing me. That gives the other person the opportunity to say, oh my gosh, no, not at all. That's not what my intention was. What I meant was, I was trying to joke around. I'm sorry that hurt your feelings. Or, well, yeah, it kind of is something that bothers me. Is that something we could talk about a little bit more? It helps you get back on the same page. And giving feedback can also be something that can be very positive, based on positive things that happen. I really appreciated when you put the kids to bed so that I didn't have to do it right before my presentation and, listen to them screaming or those types of things. So being able to give that feedback, whether it's something positive or negative, can be really helpful to stay on the same page and prevent some of those miscommunications. So as far as other ways that we can work to improve our communication, I've got a list here, and we're going to try to maybe just tackle them one at a time here. The first one is weekly check-ins. So a piece of homework that I give to a lot of couples that I see is being able to set time aside throughout their week. A lot of people like to choose like Sunday afternoons before the work week and school week and all of that gets started again, to just sit down and have a time that's designated for them, not only just to connect as a couple, but also to go out over the logistics for the week. Make sure that they're understanding what's happening and getting on the same page so they can start their week off on a good note. So besides those logistics, it's also a time for reflection of the past week. What's gone well? What hasn't gone well? I also like to challenge couples to be able to, reflect and share what was the time over this past week that you felt most connected to your partner. That can be really helpful just to understand each other of, okay, when we went out for dinner or, when we sat on the couch and watched our favorite show, that's what felt most connecting to you. I'm going to really make an effort to do more of that because I want to feel connected and want you to feel connected to me. These type of weekly check-ins can also be really helpful as far as team meetings at work, or maybe weekly or monthly meetings with roommates or people that you're having to kind of conduct business with, but also have that personal relationship. You can kind of blend those two things of, okay, this is what has to get done, this is when we have to pay the rent, but also, hey, that was really fun when we went and did this together, we should do that again. And with couples, I also like to give them the option, or kind of encourage them of what is a goal that you want to work towards in the upcoming week, and being able to verbalize that to your partner of, I'm going to put in an effort to really try to not raise my voice, for example. It's not for the purpose of the other person being able to say, hey, you did that and you said you weren't going to, but just to show that commitment of, relationships take work, and this is what I'm going to put in to try to help ours be better. The next one there after the weekly check-ins is timeouts. So this is, I feel like my mind immediately goes to, you did something wrong, take a timeout. That's not what this is. This is a pause. This is recognizing that the situation is overwhelming and that one or both people are not really in a state that they're able to continue the conversation, and that they need a break from it. And that's okay. Not every conversation has to end in the same conversation that it started in. Sometimes we're just not able to, whether, it's because of what we're bringing to the table, we had a bad day, or maybe it's just a really intense topic. We might need to take multiple timeouts. So in order to be able to do that, there's a couple of steps we need to follow. And before we jump into that, a really common dynamic with couples is one partner tends to be the one who pursues the conversation, and one tends to be the one who withdraws. So a very visual example of this is a friend of mine who she talks about, like, she will literally follow her husband into the next room, and he will remove himself and go into the bedroom, and she'll follow, and go into the bathroom and she'll follow. So a very visual example of what that pursue and withdraw dynamic looks like. The difficult thing is neither person gets their needs met. So the person who is pursuing, they have a need for resolution, for closure, for connection. And that's why they're doing what they're doing. She's following because she wants to feel better about the situation. He is withdrawing because he's feeling overwhelmed and he just needs some space. So her need is, let's keep talking. His need is, get me the heck out of here. I don't want anything to do with this. Obviously, those are competing needs, and in that situation, neither of them are getting their needs met. So that is why timeouts can be so important. There's a couple of steps that are really important to follow to make sure they work the way that they're meant to. So the first one is whoever's requesting the timeout needs to be able to, validate and say something to show that they understand the other person's perspective. So the best example I can think of is, if I've been home all day with the kids and I've been kind of stewing over something. I'm sure some others of you out there are stewers also. So if you're stewing over something and, then my husband gets home, I've had the last 8 hours to stew over this and to, plan my closing argument and what I'm going to say and how and why I'm going to be right and all of that. He, in a lot of cases, is kind of ambushed and, under attack right there of, whoa, I had no idea any of this was going on in the background, and bam, I'm kind of expecting him to have a response to whatever topic is that I'm bringing up. That's not particularly fair for either of us. So the way a timeout would work in that situation would be for him to say something along the lines of, hey, I understand that this is really bothering you, or, I can hear that this is really important, and we do need to have that conversation. I want to talk about it. But also for him then, the second step is to acknowledge where he's at. I had a really long day and I feel like I need a minute to think before I can talk about something like that. Or, I really haven't had much time to think about how I feel about that. So I'm gonna need some time. Then for him to also set, the third step is, when are we going to have that conversation? So, I need some time. Could we talk after we put the kids to bed? Or could we talk tomorrow morning? That type of a thing, just so you know when that conversation will be taking place. And the fourth step, which is really, really important, kind of the most important one, is for the person who requested, excuse me, the person who requested the timeout to be able to bring it back up at that designated time. So it communicates a lot of trust, it communicates a lot of connectedness, and even though the conversation might not be, completely positive, it might turn into a conflict, that willingness to have that conversation is so important as far as connection in relationships. So again, timeout is validating the person's feelings, recognizing where you're at and verbalizing that, setting the time that you're going to come back to it, and then actually doing it. And that might happen several times throughout a conversation. I've had couples having conversations about retirement that they've taken 10 or more timeouts throughout that conversation. And that's okay. Sometimes topics are really big and really emotional, or the way we feel about them might change, and we might need some time to process that. So rather than letting it get out of hand and escalated, taking that time out and that break can be really helpful. The next one on the list there is responding to bids for connection. So a bid for connection is any time we are reaching out to our partner because we want to connect with them. They can be really simple things of, hey, look at that, look out the window, look at that bird there, kind of a silly example, but that could be something. We're trying to get our partner's attention. They can respond in a few different ways. They can look and say, oh, cool, I've never seen a bird like that before. They can stay looking at their phone and go, and not really acknowledge, and just kind of sits there. Or they can say, oh, I hate birds. Why would you pay attention to that? You can turn towards your partner, you can turn away, or you can turn against. And those can lead to really different conversations depending on how that goes and how that builds up over time. So we want to really try to respond to those bids for connection. A really great example when it comes to friends or partners or anybody that we want to spend time with is offering an invitation of, hey, do you want to go to a movie? Do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to go for dinner? The response to that, maybe you're not able to. You could just say flat out no, and they could interpret that as, okay, they don't like me, they don't want to. It could have a lot of implications to it. Or, you can turn towards and say, oh, that sounds really great. I'm not able to tonight, but how about tomorrow? So making that effort to connect, and rather than things just being completely cut off, making the connection the priority in that conversation. The next one here is the 5 love languages. So I've got another slide here just so you've got them in front of you. Sometimes it's hard to figure out which one really speaks to you. But the basic premise behind the 5 love languages is that there's these 5 different ways that we can give or receive love from our partners. And sometimes it's as if we're speaking a different language if our love language is different than theirs. So this theory was created by Gary Chapman, and I've got the website listed on there also, 5lovelanguages.com. If you're interested, you can definitely check that out and take a little online quiz. It'll help you determine which one really speaks to you. And none of these are bad or wrong. My love language is not gifts, but I certainly wouldn't turn down a gift or be upset to receive a gift from my partner. It just wouldn't be the thing that necessarily screams, I love you, and that's what that, what that message is communicating. So the 5 love languages are acts of service, physical touch, quality time, words of affirmation, and gifts. So acts of service is anything that you do or your partner does to make your life easier. So maybe they take your car for an oil change, or fill it up with gas, or they run an errand for you, or they put the kids to bed, or do something that just helps you out. That's the way that they're expressing their love. Physical touch is the second one, which can be either sexual or non-sexual. It can be holding hands, it can be, kissing, really wide range of what speaks to people as far as this love language. And I think it's important to say with all of these that your definition of those is going to be much, much more important than my definition, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. approach at all. Every time I talk about quality time, I always think of a couple that I worked with very early on where one of their love languages was quality time. And she said, it feels like I just never am getting my needs met. We never have this time together. I just want to feel like we can have some real quality time. And he was blown away by this and said, what do you mean we don't have quality time? We watch the Packer game every Sunday. And that was not her definition of quality time. For him, it was just physically being in the same space. And that's okay that that's his definition. But for her, what she really needed to have her needs met and fill that bucket was to feel like they're connecting, they're having a conversation. There aren't distractions of, yelling at the TV or doing different things like that. So quality time, making your partner a priority, doing something that lets you connect with that time that you're spending together. Words of affirmation is the fourth one. So using words to explain to your partner how you feel, saying I love you, saying you look nice today, saying I appreciate you, I'm proud of you, anything that expresses that love through words. And then gifts is pretty self-explanatory, bringing home flowers, getting them a really nice birthday present, different things like that. There's a couple of reasons why I really like this concept and why I think it's so important when working with couples. And, the first one is it makes us more receptive to what our partners are already doing. So my love language is words of affirmation. If my partner's isn't that, maybe I start to understand a little more of, oh, okay, when you're taking out the garbage or when you are emptying the dishwasher, doing the dishes, doing the laundry, that's you showing me that you love me. Doing those things is your equivalent of saying I love you or saying I appreciate you. So we get more receptive to what our partners are already doing. The second part of that is we don't have to be mind readers anymore or make assumptions. I think without understanding the love languages, we might just assume that our definition of love is the same as our partners. And a lot of times that's not true. I think in all the couples that I've worked with, I've only had one or two where they have the same top love language. So very common that we don't match up with our partners, and that's okay. We become more receptive to what they're already offering, and we become more aware of what our partner is looking for from us. And like we talked about just a minute ago with feedback, giving feedback on those things is really important to help them know, hey, you're on the right track. That feels really good when you say those things or you do those things. So I think that's a really important part of it. Something else that I think is really interesting with the love languages and very important to keep in mind is based on what we're looking for, that's generally what we're also most likely to give. So if my love language is words of affirmation, that's just how I define love. That's what comes naturally to me. So that's also going to be what I'm most likely to give. So understanding that helps us really be more aware of what those interactions are looking like. It's also helpful from the perspective of when we are lacking in some of these areas. So if my love language is gifts and my partner doesn't buy me a birthday present, that's going to hurt me a lot more deeply than somebody where gifts is at the very bottom of their list. Or if my love language is acts of service and it feels like I'm always having to pick up after everybody and nobody else is pitching in, it's going to be really hard to feel loved when that love language is not being met. So understanding what they are helps us know not just what our partners are looking for, but also the things that, maybe it might seem like they're overreacting, but it's just really because that's their love language and that need is going unmet. Another really important thing before we move on from love languages is this definitely applies to other types of relationships. So there is the 5 Love Languages book that's meant, for couple relationships, but there's the 5 Love Languages of children, of teenagers. This can certainly be applied to your relationships with your kids. And, every kid is different. They need different things. And that connection is built different ways for each child. So being able to really tune into what they're looking for can help you have, the best relationship that you can. There's also the book that's the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. So a lot of these can be equated to that, of maybe you really appreciate your boss taking time one-on-one to sit down with you and mentor you. Maybe that would be that quality time, and that would show, appreciation. Or verbally, saying, hey, you did a great job, I'm really proud of you. So really interesting to see how that translates to different situations. After the 5 love languages here, we've got understanding our patterns and our habits. So we don't always communicate the same, but a lot of times if we're aware and if we pay attention, we can notice patterns that emerge. So there is a handout that I use with a lot of couples that I work with that's by Douglas Tilley, and it's called When We're Not Getting Along. It goes through a very long list of what do I do, how do I feel, how does my body feel, and how do we interact. So becoming more aware of what actually is going on in that interaction can help you to notice it before it starts to escalate. So what do? Do I criticize? Do I rationalize? Do I try to defend myself? Do I attack? What do I do when I start to feel threatened, like we're not getting along, things aren't going well? So being able to be mindful of that. How do I feel? There's a long list of, I feel vulnerable, I feel disappointed, I feel rejected, I feel hurt. Maybe you feel guilty, maybe you feel disappointed or hopeless. Being aware of, what those feelings are can really tell you a lot about, oh, okay, that's why I'm responding the way that I am. It isn't just what it appears on the surface. The next one of how my body feels can also be a really big cue of, okay, this is starting to build, this is starting to escalate. Maybe I need to take a break. Maybe I need to request that time out. Done couples research where they've got both partners hooked up to a heart rate monitor, and when one or both partners gets to a certain level, they say, okay, we're gonna take a break. Conversations aren't really effective after we get past a certain level, so we need to regulate ourselves. We need to bring it back to that zone where we can communicate again. So recognizing maybe your heart starts racing, maybe your breathing rate increases, or your palms get sweaty, or your chest feels tight. What happens to you physically when you kind of get that sense that things aren't going well and you're not getting along? And then the last one is how we interact. So is that pursue and withdraw dynamic going on? Is one person shutting down and just kind of completely removing themselves from that conversation? Is one person, getting more aggressive or, raising their voice? What is happening that, kind of fuels that interaction? Because a lot of times when we get to that point where interactions are starting to, get kind of negative, it can spiral really quickly because we're kind of fueling the other person's negative response with our own responses. So being aware of what those patterns and habits look like can be really, really helpful. And then the last one we've got there is using the fair fighting rules. So you can look this up online. There's just a one-page PDF on Therapist Aid, and it's called the Fair Fighting Rules. And it explains a little bit more about what can we do to put some ground rules in place when we're having a disagreement. And it can help that disagreement from turning into a fight or an argument. It can help keep it at a respectful level, which is so important. Being able to ask yourself first, why are you upset? Is this really about what is on the surface, or is it about something different? Is this really because somebody didn't put the dishes in the dishwasher, or is it because you feel like you're doing an unequal share of the household work, or that you're having to, you're feeling disrespected, that other people are, messing up the space that you've cleaned? There's a lot of different things that might be underneath what's on the surface. The next one is discussing just one issue at a time. So not responding to your partner's complaint or your roommate's complaint or whoever it is you're talking with a complaint of your own. Of, maybe one person says, it really bothers me when you don't empty the dishwasher. Apparently I've really got a thing about the dishwasher here. And then the other person responds, well, you never take out the trash. And then the other person responds, well, I'm the only one who does the laundry. that conversation gets out of hand in such a hurry because no problems are actually being addressed. It's just this laundry list of you did this, you did that, and turns into this just back and forth game of scorekeeping. And we don't feel on the same page. We don't feel even on the same team. We are adversaries in that moment. And that is not what we want for our relationship. So, it's not to say that any of those other complaints are not valid or that they can't be discussed. It's just the timing of them is important. We need to address the issue at hand and then bring up the other ones, not in response to it, but after that one has some type of closure. Not using degrading language, not putting the person down, being able to address the issue and not the person. So not calling them lazy, but just, talking about and it kind of goes into the next one, expressing feelings and using those I statements of, I feel really disrespected when you don't pick up after yourself, or, just really focusing on how that feels to you and focus on those behaviors. Not stonewalling and not yelling. So not just shutting down and putting those walls up and keeping that conversation from moving forward. It's really important to be able to recognize if you're able to continue with that conversation, great. If you need a timeout, that's okay too, but just being able to really be present and have that conversation when you're able. And also not raising your voice, not interrupting, not doing things that are going to trigger the other person and make that conversation turn south. And then the last one, trying to come up with a compromise or an understanding. So some problems, we don't necessarily have a resolution to them, but to keep from feeling like we're having the same argument over and over and over, which is a big complaint and something you hear from so many couples, is to actually have some type of understanding or, compromise, resolution, whatever it might be. So instead of this conversation just continuing on every time something new comes up, you actually feel like you get somewhere. You feel like you understood each other. And that can feel really good to, maybe we don't agree, but I understand why this is important to you, or I understand why this bothers you. So it's really helpful from that perspective to be able to have some type of understanding when you are doing that. So that is the bulk of what I've got for you. I will check back in with Hannah and see if there's any questions.
There we go. Sorry. So we did have a few questions. Well, first a shout out from Krista. She said, "You go, girl," which I thought was very sweet. But one question I had was the fair fighting rules. How do you keep those in place throughout time?
Yeah, so I think just really, that's kind of a guideline, those rules, but it's really helpful to sit down with, your partner, your roommate, whoever it is that you guys are having these conversations with, and figure out what you want those ground rules to be. So a rule for some people might not have to be a rule for other people. I think if both people feel like they're involved in the creating of those rules, it can help them to be enforced and people have more accountability then.
Love it. If someone is not good at vocalizing how they feel, do you have any suggestions on how to help them be a bit more vocal?
Sure. I think starting with what are the barriers. So for some people, it comes really naturally. It's what was modeled for them with their parents or their family growing up, in other relationships. And it just kind of flows. For other people, that might not feel so comfortable. It's definitely a skill that you can learn, but it takes time and it takes patience. So being able to, I've had, plenty of people that I've worked with where we've looked at just a list of different feelings and trying to identify what are different situations that make them feel those different ways. If that's not something you're used to doing, it doesn't just pop right into your head. You don't just go, oh, I'm feeling disappointed right now. It's just, I feel bad or I feel angry. And a lot of people, I feel like, struggle with, okay, what's underneath the anger? So that's something that's really important. Also, maybe your response is anger, but maybe underneath that you're feeling hurt. Maybe you're feeling sad or, other more vulnerable emotions that are much more difficult to express.
Mm-hmm. Another question we had was, do you have any tips to help people see the differences between intention versus interpretation, or ways to break down those differences so people can be more on the same page?
Yeah, I think that the active listening can be really helpful. So listening, not to respond, but just listening to really hear the other person. Sometimes people like to reflect back and repeat what they heard just to make sure that there aren't discrepancies with that. And I think also giving that feedback. So, hey, wait a second, when you said that just now, that really hurt my feelings. That didn't feel okay for me, and being able to give feedback in that way.
Mm-hmm. And then another comment we had was, the love languages are a cool way to come together and work on being on the same page. Takes away some assumptions, which I agree. I love the love language test. I think it's a really good suggestion.
Yeah, and there's also one I forgot to mention is the 5 languages of apology. So we also might need different things when it comes to, moving past hurts. So maybe we need, just the words. Maybe we need certain types of actions. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I think it can be a really great way to understand we're not all the same. We need different things in different times. So.
Well, awesome. I think those are all the questions we had so far. But thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah. I know I learned a lot about communication myself. And for all of our viewers out there, if you want to watch any other videos or see any other events we have, be sure to like our Facebook page, and there'll be more stuff up coming soon.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention was I know people learn in different ways. So, we don't have, handouts here and, all of that. All of this has been just verbal, but I am starting a blog series of the different topics that have been covered in this presentation, just to go into a little more depth. That will be starting next week. So we'll have something on the love languages, something on giving feedback, just some different tips with that. So feel free to check out the website listed there or the Facebook page if that method of information processing is better for you, or if you want to learn more.
Awesome. Great suggestion, Sarah. Thank you again so much. And thanks to everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.